Shalom, everybody. Welcome to this week's Journey Through Torah. This week we're in Parshat Toldot, which means generations. We're reading from Genesis 25:19 to 28:9. And, we start getting into the story of Isaac and then passing on to the next generation, what's to come, and his descendants. But before we get to Jacob and Esau and that kind of thing, we got to address some stuff with Yitzchak as well here, important. Our life is not just our life. Our life is to receive what has been passed on to us, to work with that, and to pass it on to the next generation. Now, the word of Yahweh was given to us as a heritage and an inheritance, which means it's where we came from. It's telling us where we were at, but it's also what we are to receive and to pass on. Now, when you receive that inheritance, you don't just take it and squander that. You take that and you build that, enrich that, and pass that on to the next generation. So what we're learning is, again, the word of Yahweh. We take it, we receive it, we walk in it, we teach it to the next generation. We get that in there so that they maybe don't have to go through the same things that we went through. Maybe don't have the same issues that we had. That's the hope, isn't it? That the next generation doesn't make the same mistakes that we did, right? That they can learn from our mistakes instead of having to make the mistakes again, right? So these are some things that we learn in this parsha. We're talking about generations that are given here and how important it is for one generation to pass on to the next generation. I mean, throughout the Torah, we see, and you are to teach it to your children. It is important. And really and truthfully, one generation as a whole, one generation can make a huge change in society and how things are done. And there's another part to this, though, is that it takes one generation to make change. However, the following generation has to be willing to walk in the ways and the change that was passed on. Okay, so are we receiving the word of Yahweh, and are we willing to walk in that and pass that on to the next generation so that they will walk in that? It's not a matter of we want to change things to make it our way. No, the way of the world is corrupt, and we want to take Yahweh's ways, walk in those, and pass that on to the next generation. So these are some things that we find with Yitzchak in this parsha. We start off with this. Yitzchak, he starts to go to Egypt, but he goes to Avimelech. Why? Because there's a famine that is in the land that is widespread. We see many times in the scripture where famine caused people to shift around and move around because they would go to the place where the famine was not. Right? Which is, makes sense. You got to survive. You got to live. You got to be able to plant. You got to be able to grow food. You got to be able to have stuff for your livestock. All of this has to happen. So why did he go to Avimelech, though? Because his father, Avraham, had a covenant with Avimelech. So if he goes to Avimelech and says, hey, the famine's pretty bad. Can you help me out here? Right? So this is why he went to him. Right? So what he learns from this is to stay in the land that he has been given to occupy. Don't go down to Egypt right now. Okay, which again, we see in different times, different places. Sometimes they went down to Egypt, sometimes they didn't. And this is one of those scenarios where Yahweh told Yitzchak, do not go down to Egypt. I'm going to give you a blessing here, right? And Yahweh reaffirms the covenant that he made with Avraham to Yitzchak. We see in Genesis 26, verses 3 through 5, it says, stay in this land, and I will be with you and bless you. Because I will give all these lands to you and your descendants, I will fulfill the oath I swore to Avraham your father. This is what he's saying. He is reaffirming the covenant to Yitzchak because of Avraham. And then he says, I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky, and I will give all these lands to your descendants, and by your descendants all the nations of the earth will bless themselves. So, He affirms this to Yitzchak because of covenant relationship, not with Avimelech, but with Yahweh. So Yahweh is saying, because I had covenant with Avraham, and because Avraham walked with me, I'm going to continue these blessings to you that I promised Avraham I would do. So again, we have this picture. Avraham lived by faith, right? He heard the word of Yahweh. He followed it. He heard Yahweh and he believed. That means he did, right? Belief led to action. It's not a theoretical belief, it's application. And so how did that play out? We see this in Genesis 26:5. He said, all of this is because Avraham shema what I said. He shema my voice. We know that shema doesn't just mean to hear. It means to hear with the intent on acting on what you have heard. So he shema my voice. And he kept what I told him to do. That word shamar is used there when he says he kept. That means to watch over, guard, protect. Shomer is the word for a watchman. And so he watched over, guarded, and protected what I told him to do. He followed my mitzvot. That word mitzvah there is commands. So whatever Yahweh had commanded, he did. And then my regulations, okay, is the word that's given there. Again, my regulations, this is the word that translates as regulation, ordinance, sometimes custom or decree. And so these are these things that Yahweh doesn't always give an explanation for. It's just the way he wants it done. And then lastly, he says, and my teachings. That's the word Torah. And my Torah. Everything that Yahweh gives to us in teaching is Torah. Torah means teaching and instruction. All right? How Yahweh spoke to Avraham, he was teaching him. That was Torah. Okay? We have written down what we need to have written down, guys, but when Yahweh was speaking to Avraham, he said he walked in my Torah. Well, Avraham didn't have it written down yet, but Yahweh was teaching him. So again, he walked in my Torah. And we learn from this Yeshua telling us the same thing. We need to hear the voice of the Father. We need to walk with him in those things. Yeshua said, my sheep hear my voice. I know them and they follow me. Not just, and they hear my voice and that's it. No, there's an action that has to happen on that. We must follow him. How do we do that? Well, we walk in the ways that he established for us, the things that he taught and instructed us, which again was Torah. In John 14:15, Yeshua says, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. It doesn't contradict what the Father said. It doesn't contradict what was given before. In John 14:23 and 24, Yeshua says, if anyone loves me, he will keep my word, and my Father will love him and will come to him and make our home with him. Whoever does not love me does not keep my words, and the word that you hear is not mine, but the Father's who sent me. So again, Yeshua is saying all the things that I'm doing are the things that you've already been instructed and already been told, but somewhere along the way, you went left to center. And so he came to show us how to properly walk it out. In John 15:9 through 11, Yeshua says, as the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. Abide in my love. That's great. How do we do that? Verse 10, if you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love. Okay, so did Yeshua command anything that contradicted what the Father gave? No. Keep reading. Just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. These things I have spoken to you that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be full. He's saying, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love, I'm asking you to do the same. That's what I have done. You've seen my example. This is what I am giving to you. All right? 1 John 5:2 and 3, John, Yochanan tells us, by this we know that we love the children of God, when we love God and obey his commandments. For this is the love of God, that we keep his commandments, and his commandments are not burdensome. So back to our story. Genesis 26:12 to 14. We see again, Yahweh was reaffirming to Yitzchak, Avraham did what I said. He kept all these things. He kept my word. He kept my Torah. He walked in my Torah. And all of these things is why I am passing on this covenant to you, and I will do for you what I promised Avraham I will do. All right, so what happens? So Yitzchak goes, this is a famine time, right? He goes and he plants crops in a land and reaped 100 times as much as he had sowed. Adonai blessed him. We see this in Genesis 26, verses 12 to 14. It says, and the man became rich and prospered more and more until he became very wealthy indeed. And he had flocks and cattle and a large household, and the Philistines envied him. Of course, because here's this man, in a time of famine, he's reaping stuff. He's getting livestock that's giving birth and being fruitful, and he's got a harvest that's going too, right? And so Yahweh is blessing him, and this blessing is showing because there's famine, but Yitzchak has got everything he needs, and he's got a lot of it. So there's this blessing that others are seeing here, and instead of coming and acknowledging the blessing, they're being jealous and envious, And then there's contention because of that. But guys, Yeshua addressed this as well. In Mark 4, Yeshua talks about the sower sowing the seed. Well, the seed is the word of Yahweh, and then the type of ground is you, right? The type of ground that's being given in. And so we have to have good seeds sown in good ground to reap the harvest. And when the harvest comes, Mark 4:20, Yeshua says, those are the ones that are sown on the good soil. They hear the word and they accept it, and they produce fruit, 30, 60, and 100-fold. Now, the amount of the fruit, that's up to Yahweh, right? But he says that if you're good ground, you get good seed, you're going to have good fruit. And he's going to cause that harvest to come forward and to be produced. Now, in the desert and in the crops and the livestock and you, what do you need? Water, right? So again, if there's a famine, a lot of the wells probably dried up. A lot of the cisterns probably dried up, right? But what do we find here? Let's keep reading. Yitzchak had water. He had wells, but he had to work for it. All right? So what happens here? Genesis 26, 15 and 16. The Philistine had stopped up and filled with dirt all the wells his father's servants had dug during the lifetime of Avraham, his father. See that? So Avraham dug wells, right? He had places he dug wells. And what happens was, instead of the well being a blessing, and instead of the well helping the community and doing these things, they were jealous and envious that they had these wells, and so they filled them in with dirt and trash and everything else. They filled it in the father's wells. Guys, we can take a spiritual lesson on this, right? That once we dig through to find living water, don't fill back in the wells with all the trash and all this dirt and all the stuff that prevents the water from flowing. That's what the Philistines did. And they did it because of envy and strife, and contention, jealousy, right? So here, what happens? Verse 16. So Avimelech says to Yitzchak, you must go away from us because you have become much more powerful than we are. So again, because of envy, they were jealous. They stopped up the flowing water. And so they had to send Isaac away saying, look, you're getting too blessed for us. So you need to go away. We don't want you around here. Again, he could have blessed them as well, right? But no. See, we can't have it that way. We need to be blessed, but you're being blessed. And because you're being blessed, we don't want you around here. See, instead of maybe joining in with the blessing, because they were in covenant, they could have done that, right? So nope, that's not what happened. So what we see is this. The kingdom of darkness will try to spread envy and fear, right? We'll try to spread jealousy, envy, fear, hatred, contention, strife, dissension, all of these things. That's not the way the kingdom of light is supposed to work, right? So the wells were stopped up that were dug by Avraham. Now, the interesting thing here, the word for well is ba'ar, which the root is be'er, which the root of the word is ba'ar, which means to engrave. It means to have a well is something that is dug into the ground. Okay, you dig. But when you engrave something, you are digging into whatever you're engraving, right? Here, an example, earth or stone. You're digging in and you are pulling out what is not to be revealed there. You're pulling out that is not the living water. When you are engraving, you are pulling out the earth, and ultimately that will reveal the water. This is the same word that's used when Yahweh says he will engrave on stone tablets. See that? The same as he will engrave in you, in your heart, within you. Same things. So the idea here is, are we willing to allow Yahweh to dig into our hearts, dig into our lives, to get rid of the things that don't need to be there so that the living water can be revealed there? Okay? Yahweh said he would engrave his word into you. And it's the same thing. When we're digging into the earth, we're looking for living water, and we are pulling out what is not the water so that the water can be revealed. Another interesting thing, Genesis 26:18, Yitzchak, he dug the wells that he had dug from his father Avraham, and he gave them the same names that his father gave them. So after we dig the wells, are we trying to do something different, or are we trying to do what was passed on to us? Now, in Avraham, he was passing on the good things, the righteous things, the life of Yahweh, walking in his word, walking in his Torah, doing these things. So when he redug the wells, he was making an acknowledgement of what Yahweh was doing, okay? But the interesting thing is, after the wells were dug is when the problem started. So again, when you're in the pursuit of living water, those around you may be jealous of these things, may start causing problems. So he named them according to the same names his father had given him, which we find are prophetic and some different things that happened here. Okay, so what were Isaac's wells? Well, first one in Genesis 26:20, it says, so the herdsmen of Gerar quarreled with Isaac's herdmen, saying, the water is ours. So he called the name of the well Esek, because they contended with him. Esek means strife. Okay, and the word Esek can even mean a lawsuit. Okay, so Esek means strife. So they built the well, and then they strove over it. All right. So what happens? He has to go on. So verse 21, he didn't want to cause problems. He didn't want to go to war. So he goes and he digs another well. Verse 21. So they dig another well, and they quarreled over that also. And he called its name Sitnah. Sitnah is from the word Satan, which means accuser. All right, yeah, Satan. Yeah, Satan is the Hebrew word. It means accuser. So they come in, they dig the well, and they're making accusations. This well is ours as well. This one was ours. This one was ours, right? So they're making accusations against him again. And then what happens? Verse 22. So he moves and he digs another well, and they didn't quarrel over it. So he called it Rehoboth, saying, for now Yahweh has made room for us, and we will be fruitful in the land. So he calls us Rehoboth, which from the word Rahav, which means open spaces, room enough. Okay? Here's another thing as well. He outlasted his critics. He outlasted his opponents. He outlasted his accusers. He prevailed. He didn't go to war with them. He said, I'm going to keep digging the wells, and Yahweh is going to bless me. I know it because he already has, and he's already declared he will. So we're going to go through this, and we're going to keep going. And this Rehoboth is this room enough. There's room enough for everyone who comes to the Father here. There's room enough for all who need this. And this well was, again, life that was there. Okay, and then verses 23 to 33, we have restoration being given here. Okay, so his enemies appeared, and they asked for his forgiveness and blessing. And then Yitzchak makes a feast, and he restored covenant with them. This was Beersheba, well of the oath. So this was restoration that was given. Yitzchak reopened the wells that were dug by Avraham, and what did he find? Living water. Okay, living water. What we have here, Genesis 26:18 and 19, says he reopened the wells which had been dug during the lifetime of Avraham his father, the ones that Philistine had stopped up after Avraham died, and he called them by the names his father used for them. Yitzchak's servants dug in the valley, and they uncovered a spring of living water. Mayim Chaim, living water. What else do we know about living water? Well, Yeshua said he's the living water, right? What else do we know about the living water? There's other references to it. Well, in Jeremiah 2:13, it says, my people have committed two evils. What are they? Well, they have abandoned me, the fountain of living water. That's the one. They have abandoned Yahweh, the fountain of living water. How can Yeshua say he's the living water? Well, right here in Jeremiah 2:13, it says Yahweh is the fountain of living water. They have abandoned me, the fountain of living water, and they dug for themselves cisterns. What's the difference between a well and a cistern? Well, a well has water and it's life and it's living, but a cistern just holds the water. And you got to be careful with a cistern, because if you don't care for it properly, the water will get stagnant. Right? And it'll start growing this bacteria and get bad and can actually make you sick, right? So got to be careful with that. So they turned away from the well, from the springs of living water, into cisterns, and at that, broken cisterns that can't hold any water. So again, we try to go our own way. We try to say, well, let's do it this way. This is better. And it's not. Right? That's what it's saying in Jeremiah 2:13. And in Jeremiah 17:13, it says, the hope of Israel, Adonai, all who abandon you will be ashamed. Those who leave you will be inscribed in the dust, because they have abandoned Adonai, the source of living water. Now, when it says the hope of Israel, hope is tikva, right? Hatikva, like the hope, the national anthem of Israel. But this is the word that's used here isn't tikva. It's the same root, kava, but it is the word mikvah. Mikvah is a gathering of water. So the hope of Israel, the gathering together of water, the one who is the living water, the one who makes us clean, the one who gives us life. This is what it's talking about. And in John 7:38, Yeshua says, whoever puts their trust in me, as the scripture says, rivers of living water will flow from his inmost being. And in John 4:10 and 11, Yeshua, the woman at the well, says, if you knew God's gift that is here, saying to you, give me a drink of water, that you would have asked him, and he would give you living water. And Revelation 7:17 It says, the Lamb is at the center of the throne. He will shepherd them. He will lead them into springs of living water, and God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. That's what we're looking at. That's what we're looking for. And that's acknowledging who he is, right? Okay, so what is our role in this? What is our responsibility in this? We have a responsibility to redig the wells that have been stopped up. Okay, what I'm saying here, namely Scripture, the things that have been stopped up, the ideologies, doctrines, theologies, all of these things that have stopped up the wells of living water. We need to dig it out and let the living water flow. We got to find the living water, rediscover your heritage and your inheritance, even in a time of famine, especially in a time of famine. And we have to hold on to the promise that Yahweh has given to us. And we need to learn to obey Yahweh, to trust him. Okay? And when I say redig the wells, I mean get in the Scripture, pray, study, right? Redig the wells, find that living water, know who your Savior is, know what he taught, know what he has called us to be. Okay? If you do not redig the wells, you will not have clean water to pass to the next generation. Right? You can't, and anything that you teach, anything that you instruct, anything you disciple, anything you try to pass on is going to be tainted. It's going to be polluted. It's going to be contaminated. And what happens when the people of Yahweh who are supposed to be living water were contaminated by outside influences? Well, they became assimilated into all the land. When they turn from Yahweh, they lose their identity, and then they become assimilated into all the land. So what does this mean? The differences between identity and assimilation. Really quick, Webster's definitions puts it this way. For an identity is the quality or condition of being the same as something else. That is identity, a collective aspect of characteristics which something is distinctly recognizable or known. Assimilation is to learn something that is fully understood, that can be used, part of a different society, or to adopt another culture, to alter or absorb something. So your identity is who Yahweh has called you to be, and when we turn away from him, the source of living water, and we go to seek our own way, we are becoming assimilated into the ways of the world. We are learning the ways of another culture that is not the culture of the kingdom of Yahweh. We learn that what is Yahweh's kingdom? What is the culture of Yahweh's kingdom? We learn that by getting in the Word, by redigging the wells of our hearts, pulling out those things that don't need to be there so that living water can flow as his word is engraved within us. Deuteronomy 18:9 says, when you come into the land which the Lord your God is giving you, you will not learn to follow the abominations of those nations. Because you're going to see this. It's going to be new. It's going to be exciting. It's going to be all these things, but it's wrong. Okay? You're not to do these things. And further, you are not to do these things and say you're doing it for Yahweh. See, you don't worship Yahweh that way. Deuteronomy 12:30 says, take heed to yourself that you are not ensnared to follow them after they're destroyed from before you, and that you do not inquire after their gods, saying, how do these nations serve their gods? I will also do likewise. That's not even saying, really, so how did they serve their gods? I want to serve their gods. It can mean that, but that's not even, it goes further than that. It says, how do they serve their gods? I want to serve my God the way they serve their gods, which in turn really is you're setting up an idol, calling it Yahweh, and serving it like the idols. A lot to consider there. Leviticus 18:26 says, you shall therefore keep my statutes and judgments and not commit any of these abominations, either any of your own nation or any stranger who dwells among you. And in Jeremiah 10:2, thus says the Lord, do not learn the way of the nations, and do not be dismayed at the signs of heaven, for the nations are dismayed at them. He doesn't say that you can't acknowledge the things in the heavens. I mean, even consider how the three kings, the three wise men, how the three kings knew that Yeshua had come. They were watching the heavens, right? So it's not saying you can't acknowledge the signs that are in the heavens. He says, do not be dismayed at them. This is not how you, like the horoscope thing. This is not what you do. You don't plan your life according to the stars. You plan your life according to the word of Yahweh. And at the right time, he can reveal things to us to show what he's doing in his times and seasons as well. So what do? We learn. We're a disciple. Disciple means student. Talmidim means student. Okay, so what does a student do? You learn, you study. And as we learn and as we study, the idea is that we teach the next generation. 2 Timothy 2:15 says, do your best to present yourself to God as one approved, a worker who has no need to be ashamed, rightly handling the word of truth. See that? Study. You got to do that. You study. 1 Thessalonians 4:11 and 12. Make it your goal to live quietly, to mind your own business, and to work with your own hands as we instructed you, so that you may win the respect of outsiders and have need of nothing. Proverbs 22:6. Train up a child in the way they will go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. Ephesians 6:1 through 4. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother. This is the first commandment with the promise, that it may go well with you and that you may live long in the land. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. Again, no double standards. You may have heard it said, don't do what I do, do what I say. That's a double standard. That's not the way we're supposed to teach our children. We are to teach our children by, yes, teaching them, by verbally doing things, but our example speaks louder. So it's not just what we tell them so that they may know the why we do the things, but they need to see you doing the things, okay? So that you have that live by example, and then you can explain this is why we do these things. And in Deuteronomy 6, it says, this is the commandment, the statutes, the rules that Yahweh your God commanded me to teach you, that you may do them in the land which you are going over to possess. The word of Yahweh was not given for you to just theorize. It was given to you to live. All right. So this is it. Verse 2, that you may fear Yahweh your God, you and your son and your son's son, by keeping all his statutes and his commandments, which I command you, all the days of your life, that your days may be long. Hear, therefore, O Israel, and be careful to do them, that it may go well with you, and that you may multiply greatly as Yahweh, the God of your fathers, has promised you, in a land flowing with milk and honey. And then famously, verse 4, Shema Israel, right? The Shema, right? Hear Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and all your might. Verse 6, and these words I command you today are to be on your heart, to be engraved within you, or to be on your heart. And then verse 7, and you shall teach them diligently to your children. How do we do that? Talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, when you arise. Verse 8, bind them as a sign on your hand. They shall be as a frontlets between your eyes. They're involved in the aspects of your life, in the things that you do, even the things you consider, the things that you think about. All of this is giving back to Yahweh, even writing them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates, and you're coming and you're going, and the in and out, Yahweh goes before you. It is he who we live with, right? So what are we to do? We're to be planted, right? We are to grow, we are to mature, we are to receive the living water, and then we are to teach the next generation. We see a good example of this in Psalm 1. Every Shabbat we have a blessing for the men, right? The blessing is Psalm 1 through 3. Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the ways of sinners, nor sits in the seat of the scoffers. But his delight is in the law of Yahweh, and on his law he meditates day and night. He is like a tree planted by streams of water that yields its fruit in its season, and his leaf does not wither, and in all he does, he prospers. So the question is, are we wells or are we cisterns? It says that Yeshua said, he who believes in me, rivers of living water, right? Flowing living water. Are we a well or are we a cistern? We just want to keep some water and hoard it up and let it get stagnant, or do we want to be a well that receives water and gives water? A cistern can be useful. A cistern can be a necessary survival tool in some environments. However, if they leak, it's a problem. If they're broken, it's a problem. And then if they don't leak, then you have to deal with stagnation, right? You got to deal with that. You got to keep the water fresh that's in there. Preferred source, if you ask, would you rather have a well or a cistern? You would rather have a well or a stream, right? This is preferable. And that's what Yahweh asks us to be. We are to be that living water that he is called, that he is, right? So how do we see some of this? Okay, living water. First off, living water comes from the throne of Yahweh. We see this in Zechariah 14 and Revelation 7 and Revelation 22. We see that the living water is everlasting life to those who receive it. We see this Yeshua speaking in John 4. We see that the living water is the Ruach HaKodesh to the believer. We see that in John chapter 7. And we see that the living water is justice for those who suffer the tribulation, again in Revelation 7. And then the living water is the healing of all the nations in Revelation 22. We are to be the living water. The living water flows from the throne of Yahweh, but it flows to you and through you. Be that living water that Yeshua has called us to be. He said he is the living water. He is the life. He also said he's the light of the world. He also said you're the light of the world. All that we have received from him, it's not just for you. It's for you to take in, to receive, to grow, and to give out to others. Right? All that you've received, you give. And that's what the Father has called us to. Okay. Well, that's what we've got for you today, guys. Hope this has been a blessing and encouragement, and challenging as well. And if this has blessed you, then please share it. Whatever avenue you watch or you listen, please share these. Help get them out there. If this has blessed you, it's going to bless somebody else, right? So please help share these to get them out there. And if this has been a blessing to you, then please consider giving a donation to help us keep putting these out there, different platforms, the different ways that we need to produce these and make them happen, right? You can help us do that, okay? So until next time, be blessed, be a blessing, and shalom.